Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Author with Samantha Young. We're very excited to have her here chatting with us today. We've got some really exciting giveaways throughout, and for those who are tuning into the playback, don't worry, you can still get in on the action. We've got some really exciting gift packs from our partner Book Trib. Each gift pack contains 4 different books. We've got Once a Liar, The Flight Girls, Saving Washington, and finally, Across the River. So lots of chances to win some really great books. And of course, it also comes with a handy book tote, so you can carry your massive haul with you. Now I want to take the time to introduce Samantha Young. She is the New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of adult contemporary romances, including the On Dublin Street series, Hero, and of course, this month's GBC title, Fight or Flight. Samantha is currently published in 30 countries and is a #1 best-selling author. Samantha, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We're so happy to chat with you.
Thank you for having me. It's really awesome to chat with you. I haven't done one of these big meetings before with lots of different people, so it's really exciting for me.
Yeah, it's exciting for us too. Our members love the opportunity to chat in real life, you know, even virtually with our authors and connect and ask their burning questions. So we've got some prepared, and we'll also be adding in some member questions. So I'm ready to dive right into it.
Yeah, great.
All right. Can you tell us, because I know there's a story here that maybe not everyone realizes, how the title for this book came about?
It actually, it came about from my reader group on Facebook. We were really struggling, me and my editor were really struggling to find a title that fit the book, that was snappy and catchy and kind of had the light-hearted banter-like feel to it that the book itself had. And so I had said, I'll ask my reader group. I can't really tell them much, but we'll see what they come up with. And I literally gave them hardly anything to go by. And one of my readers, Amy Jennings, she wrote Fight or Flight. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, that's genius. It's absolutely perfect for this book. So we have Amy Jennings, the wonderful organizer of the rare events, to thank for the title of Fight or Flight.
I love it. I love it that you reached out to your readership for suggestions, and ultimately that's where the title comes from.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my readers are so important to me, and sometimes they know my characters and my voice. Sometimes they know it better than I do because they've actually read the books more than I have.
I love that. Yeah, you've got a dedicated fan base, that's for sure. How did this particular story come about? You know, what inspired you to write Ava and tell her story with Caleb?
It came from the idea of finding someone, meeting someone, and having a connection in the airport. Because I'd heard stories. I've got a few friends who told me that was where they'd met their partner. And I couldn't get over the idea, because when I'm in the airport, I'm hangry, I'm annoyed, I'm tired. I just want to get home, and I can't imagine being charming enough to attract a partner in the airport. So I love the idea of taking that and putting like how I feel at the airport into my heroine, and still having that connection happen despite, you know, the kind of hangry, angry banter between the two of them.
I love it. Yeah, airports tend to, you know, it's a stressful time when you're traveling. They don't necessarily bring out the best in people.
No.
So what inspired you to write this particular story? How did you know that you were going to have Ava meet Caleb, and where they were going to wind up in their journeys?
I really wanted to I always try to make every heroine and hero different from the last. And I always like to take characters who are perhaps not the most likable at face value, and who are complicated and complex, and dig deeper and develop them and have a reader be really kind of unsure of them, and then by the end of them, hopefully care about them the way that I care about them. I suppose Caleb falls more into that category, but I also like the idea of taking a character like Ava, who, you know, she's very beautiful, and people have their preconceived notions of what kind of person she is from her looks, and even she, you know, relied heavily on her looks when she was younger. And I just wanted to turn it on its head a little bit, because I always write heroines who are very relatable, you know, like who, like me, maybe struggle with their weight or have insecurity problems. And I just wanted to go to a character that was completely different, who was at the opposite end of the spectrum, and and kind of dive into her psyche a little more. So it was really just, I had the idea for these two characters, and I had the idea for the airport, and I just brought them together.
I love it. So that makes me want to know a little bit more about your writing process. When you start writing a book, do you have it all mapped out completely from start to finish, or do you have the concept or the beginning and you just write and see where it takes you?
I know I'm very much a plotter, and with my editor, we do work really well together, and I tend to have at least a 6-page proposal for her, for, you know, from start to finish, obviously with the idea that things will change and develop more organically as I'm writing, but we have that plot kind of set out, and the character development of where we want to take the character set out at the outset. I have tried to write as a pantser, as they say, and just go for it, but I do tend to struggle. I do like having a clear idea of where I'm taking a character from start to finish before I sit down and write it.
Mm-hmm. You've got some really strong, leading primary characters, but then you've also got some really, really great secondary characters who have some interesting stories within them, such as Harper and Caleb's brother Jamie as well. Do you feel more connected to certain characters within this story than others?
Well, definitely, and that's usually the thing that happens more organically than anything, are the secondary characters, because I wasn't expecting to love Harper as much as I did. I knew I wanted Ava to have a really strong female friendship, because that's a recurring theme in all my books. But I didn't really anticipate caring for her as much as Ava does. And Jamie actually happened without me even expecting it. I knew Caleb had a big family and that Jamie would come into it, but the story with their brother, with Jamie's twin, that happened later on in the process. So yeah, it's I always do like to have strong secondary characters, but they usually just happen as the writing's happening.
Hmm. Your note about Jamie's twin brother coming about later on in the process. Did you know from the start, when you were developing Caleb's character, what was behind his motivations? What was the hurt that was causing him to not really allow himself to get close to people and to women in particular?
Yeah, I knew at the outset that it would be his ex-girlfriend. That story was always in my mind, that this is where all of the bitterness started, from the moment that he met Ava, because that was just, he had built up this defense mechanism with everyone at that point. But as the book was going on, I felt he just needed something, needed to be more behind that defense mechanism. There had to be more loss, because he is quite unlikable in the beginning of the book. And I felt that there needed to be more of a reason for that, in order to make his development and readers care more. Because Ava had been through so much, and she was much more likable than he was, and I just didn't want readers to think, well, she's been through this and she's not horrible to people, so why is he getting away with being horrible to people, you know? So I just felt that he needed a wee bit more behind his actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think those two instances, the ex-girlfriend and then learning about his brother, it really does give a little more insight into why he is the way he is, and why he, reacts and treats people the way that he does, because of his hurt.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And why was noting Ava's parents and kind of almost a lack of parenting, why was that important to include in terms of her development and, how she reacts and how she behaves in her current life?
It was important for a few reasons. I wanted their focus to have been on, material things, on appearance, so that had become part of her psyche, so that when it came to her breakup with Nick and the things that he said to her, that she would take that in and actually believe it, because it had been in her life from the very beginning. And also because I wanted her to grow stronger from that moment with Nick. I wanted that to be her friends to have been such an important part of her life, because her parents had been so neglectful. They had become her family. So the betrayal had to be more than just two friends cheating on her. It had to be her family betraying her, to have such an impact on the rest of her life moving forward.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask a spoiler question. So anyone who is watching this live, real time, and hasn't read the ending and you don't want the spoilers, maybe just take a moment, don't listen. Or if you're watching on the playback, hit mute until we're done here. But I want to talk about the ending, and I want to talk about Ava going back to Caleb and her motivation there after his crappy behavior, not just at the end. That wasn't just the first instance of it, but they get past that, and then he really, really hurts her. So why was it important for you as the writer to have these two characters come back together and have that quote-unquote happy ending?
Because ultimately people aren't perfect, and I think everyone does deserve a second chance, especially if you understand their motivations. I don't believe you should continually go back to someone who is obviously mean to you. That I would never romanticize that in any way. But for Caleb and Ava, they were both two people who were really hurting, and before she met him, she would have been the one to continually walk away. But she loved him enough to take that second chance, to go back to him and reach out and give him the chance to be the hero she hoped that he could be. And thankfully she was right.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Thank you for that insight. That has been a topic that has been discussed at our meetings around was his treatment of Ava and why she went back. So thank you for really diving in and clarifying their motivations and why you wrote it that way. I'm going to ask a question that we've got from two members, actually. Debbie, who's on our chat right now, asks, will there be a follow-up to further explore Caleb and Ava's relationship? And also, what might happen with Harper and Jamie?
Well, I always set out to write Fight or Flight as a standalone. I've written series before, and I just really wanted to write something completely different from what I'd written before, and it be a standalone. But Harper and Jamie were unexpected. So I did have a lot of readers ask me afterwards, is there going to be a book? Is there going to be a book? I never say never. I have tried to sit down and plot out a book, but everything I've written so far just doesn't feel right. And until it does, there won't be. But as I say, I never say never. So one of these days, the right story might come to me. I just don't want to write it for the sake of, getting a book out there. It's just not me.
I kind of wonder, people fall in love with your characters and then they want more of them. Do you ever sort of feel almost like a pressure to write a follow-up book that you never intended to write?
Oh, there's definitely a pressure, but I think you have to, I think if you start giving into that pressure, you're just going to ultimately disappoint your readers, because it's not going to be a natural thing for you. You're just sitting down to write a book because you feel you have to. And I think it always tells in a story when an author has sat down to write a book that they have to write. You can just feel it in it. There's no passion in the storytelling, and I wouldn't want to do that to my readers. I'd rather make them get really impatient with me first.
Well, if anything, then you might just deliver a pleasant surprise. This is another question we get so often in our book clubs. So I have to ask, do you know if there's any plans for a movie adaptation? And if you could cast the lead characters, who would you choose to play those roles?
There isn't, unfortunately, any plans for a movie adaptation at this moment. But I do sometimes post little fantasy cast pictures from readers, and I'm trying to remember who I posted. I think it was. I want to say Chris Hemsworth for Caleb, and I think it was. I can never say her surname. Hayden. No, was it Hayden Planet? I can never say her name. That one though.
I know exactly the one you're talking about. Yes, from Nashville. Exactly. Yes, I can definitely see her as Ava. Yes, and Chris as well. His name has been mentioned on some of our groups. People have envisioned him playing Caleb as well. So spot on. We've got a question here from Maureen. She asks, have any of your books been made into movies? And if not, have you ever been approached to turn a book into a movie and have chosen not to?
No, I haven't. None of my books have been made into movies, and I haven't been approached. It is something that I would think carefully about, though, because I am a movie buff, and it feels, I know it's important for marketing for your book, but I would hate for one of my books to be turned into a movie and for me to cringe all the way through it. So it would be really important about who would be producing and directing, and I know that I should be grateful if anyone wants to turn it into a movie, but I would just want it to be right at the end of the day for myself and for my readers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. I want to talk about writing romance. And when it comes to writing romance, is there a sort of formula to follow, whether it's a self-created and self-imposed formula, or is it a formula that comes from within the genre, do you feel?
It's a little bit of both. You definitely have to have a happily ever after, or it's not considered romance within the industry, and your readers would probably kill you. But for me, within romance, it doesn't have to be as psychological as I tend to make it, but that's just a personal thing as a writer. Character development's my favorite thing, and I really love taking the characters on a journey through the book psychologically and bringing my own experiences and experiences of people that I know and love into my stories. But it doesn't have to be as heavy as that. It can just, in romance, it can just be boy meets girl, and it's fun and it's entertaining and it's fast paced and it's sexy and they have a happily ever after. Mm-hmm. So it's really ultimately up to the writer in romance, as long as they get the happily ever after at the end.
Got it. So I know that you have been inspired by writing since a really young age. I read that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis was a big inspiration for you as a child. What was it about that book specifically that encouraged you to write?
It was just the magic of taking an ordinary object like a wardrobe and walking through it, and suddenly you were in this other land with these magical creatures and this whole other history. And I had never read anything like it up until that point. And I didn't realize that books could have such an imagination. And I realized that because I had my dolls and my dolls would tell stories, and I realized that, actually imagination is limitless. And it just kicked off this love for reading and for trying to create that feeling over and over again through my own stories.
And you have written across so many different genres. I mean, from when you started out with YA, paranormal, and fantasy, and now more recently romance and contemporary fiction, how did you or do you shift between those genres? Does it pose any challenges as a writer?
It's not too challenging. I think for me, it was about, again, it always comes down to characters. The reason I moved from YA urban fantasy to contemporary romance was actually one of my readers. She had said to me, I love the romantic subplots in your books. Have you ever considered writing contemporary romance? And to be honest, it wasn't a genre I read. So I asked her for recommendations and she sent me them. And I fell in love with the genre because I realized that the characters were everything. Like it didn't matter what the plot was, because it was all about, you had to love the characters in order to enjoy a romance. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm going to give it a go. And On Dublin Street was the first contemporary romance that I'd written, and I knew it had to be as authentic as possible. So I had to bring a lot of what I knew into that book, and it paid off in that readers really got that. They really related to it.
Well, now I've got to know, what were the books that she recommended to you to read before you got into it?
Believe it or not, 50 Shades of Grey was one of them, which is really throwing me in the deep end. But she recommended Susan Elizabeth Phillips. So I read, oh my goodness, oh gosh, is it Honey? I can't remember now. I'm terrible with titles of other books. It's really bad. And Lisa Kleypas. And I'm still a huge fan of Lisa Kleypas to this day. I actually adore her historical romance, even more than her contemporary romance. And the contemporary is what I was introduced to, and that's fantastic. So yeah, that's two of them. I'm trying to remember if it was who the other one was. There was someone else. It could have been Colleen Hoover, but I'm not sure if that was before or after.
Yeah, we've read Colleen Hoover with the club, and she's been a hit.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
Mm-hmm, definitely. So we want to know, this has come from Erin. Tell us about your writing process. How did you get started into writing? What does that look like for you?
Well, I've always written since I was a kid. I wrote a lot of really bad short stories. But when I was a teenager, I was constantly trying to finish a first novel. And I don't know if it's the distraction of teen life or, I just was too young. But I could never finish a book. And then at university, I was studying classics, and I was studying Greek mythology, and it was before Greek mythology was huge in YA. And I started writing this book where Greek mythology was a big part of, the origin stories for these paranormal species. And I finished it. Hallelujah. I finished it just after I graduated, and that was a really difficult time in my life because I couldn't find work after I graduated, and I was moved back home, and I was really struggling to get any full-time employment. So I just kept writing. I just threw myself into writing, and at that time, indie publishing just really blew up, and I started following writers like Amanda Hawking and learning from her and researching, and that was when I decided to go for it myself. And that was that.
So, what does spending all your time writing to going for it as an indie writer, like what did that journey look like? How did you go about publishing your first book?
Well, for a start, it was 24/7. I honestly worked constantly because I published 11 books within the first year of. So I'd already written the 3 before I went into publishing, and then I wrote the rest within the year. So it was constant hard work, and it was learning how to format. I had to get a friend who had a degree in English to edit them because I couldn't afford an editor at the time, and I had to learn how to format. I had to learn how to do my own cover design, and some of those were pretty poor. I had to learn about KDP, Kindle Publishing, direct publishing. I was already following a ton of book bloggers because obviously I was a huge reader. So it was about taking time to individually reach out to every single one of them rather than mass emailing them, because I wanted them to know that I was actually a fan and asking them, will you do a giveaway? You don't have to read the book, just put the book on your blog and do a giveaway for it, and kind of everything, marketing, publishing, everything by myself. And it was a roller coaster. It really was. I think taking the time to research it though really helped, because I self-published in February 2011, and by August 2011 I declared myself self-employed. I was making enough money to do it full time.
That is really impressive.
It's just researching and hard work, you know, and a little bit of luck.
Take note, writers in our group, it is doable. We've got a question here from Susan. She says, writers usually have great relationships with their editors, but every relationship has its differences of opinion. Are there times you argue or find yourself taking your editor's feedback personally?
Well, if I have two editors, and I've had three, because I've got my indie editor and I've got my editor at Berkeley, and I also had my editor at Harlequin Teen when I was writing contemporary young adult. And honestly, I have been really, really lucky. My editor at Berkeley is almost like the same person. It's like a match made in heaven. I have never disagreed with her, which is unbelievable. I've questioned my indie editor sometimes, but ultimately I always believe in asking myself, why are they questioning me? There has to be a reason, you know, and if they're questioning it, then my readers are going to question it, at least some of them. But with my editor at Berkeley, really, I'm so lucky, because if she does mention something that she has a problem with, I see it right away, you know, because sometimes you're blind in the process when you're writing, you know, you're kind of stuck in it. And as soon as she said something, I'm like, God, yeah. So I'm really lucky that way.
As they say, you can't steer the ship if you are shoveling the coal.
That's it.
We've got another great follow-up question from Maureen here about the publishing experience. She said she's heard from some writer friends that getting a publisher can be extremely difficult. Has this been your experience, at least in the beginning, before you became established?
Yes. When I first started, I actually was querying agents, and so I did have my several rejections, one of whom is an agent at my current agency, which my agent loves to rub in his face. So yeah, no, I did have my rejections. It's very, very difficult. And the only reason I think I got immediate attention from agents at the time was on Dublin Street was sitting at number 16 on the Amazon charts. And that's literally what I put in the subject title, was, you know, author with number 16 book Amazon charts seeking representation, because I'd been approached by Penguin and I didn't have an agent, and so that's why I started reaching out to reps. But it is extremely difficult if you're not established, but you just have to keep pushing. And there's lots of programs now running, especially on Twitter, and where you can, you know, send parts of your manuscripts as parts of these programs to these agents. And I know my agent's involved in some of them. So social media has made it a lot easier, but it's still hard. Realistically, I wouldn't want to say that it isn't, because it's not an easy industry to break into.
Mm-hmm. And with that, do you have any advice to writers out there who are writing their first book, or have written their first and or second books, however many, and are looking to publish, whether that's self-publish or go with a publishing house?
Well, if it's with a publishing house and you're querying agents, I definitely think that you should not query the first book you've ever written. I think that, especially if you've not had like a beta readers around you, or a writing partner, or, you know, I think you need that back and forth with other people. I think if you're trying to be indie, it's really, really hard now because the market's so saturated. So everything that I did is no longer relevant. You know, I have a lot to thank bloggers for, because they really did get me my platform with my YA urban fantasy. They really did do that for me, and it's much harder to do that now because social media has closed the ranks on audience. You now have to pay for that with ads, you know, to get it out there. I think it's really just about creating a connection, a networking. I think that's the most important thing you can do as a new indie author, is reach out to as many other indie authors as possible, and find your audience through your network.
That's great advice. Thank you. We've got a great question here from Marie. She said, many of your stories take place in Scotland or include Scottish characters. When your stories like this one take place in other locations, how do you go about researching these different places like Boston?
I try to go to them if I can. The first book I ever set in Boston was Hero, and before I wrote it, I decided to go to Boston off the back of a New York signing. So I was in New York for a book signing and decided that I'd head over to Boston and do as much research as possible. And I actually really fell in love with Boston. It's one of my favourite cities, so that's why it's found its way back into my books again. And I just feel really at home there. But for the things I don't know, Google Maps is the best resource in the world. Because you can just click on the street that you're thinking about and have a little spin round and see what the buildings look like and the street looks like. And it's a fantastic resource. I don't know what authors did before it.
That's a great stand-in for when you can't just hop on a plane and go to the city itself.
Definitely.
So did you, when you were in Boston, were you were in Boston years ago and you were writing about it for a different book, correct?
Yeah, I went to Boston, I think it was 2014, and then I returned again in 2016. So I've been a couple of times now.
And had you pinpointed, you know, the area where you knew Ava was going to live and you thought that is the place?
Well, yeah, I'd actually walked around. I mean, Back Bay was where my hotel was, so I did immediately fall in love with Back Bay. But when I was actually there researching Hero, I knew that the financial district was going to be a big part of it in the market. So I already had a lot of that research from Hero, and I just kind of transferred it to Ava's story. And my second trip I took, I actually visited 15 Beacon Hotel, and I love that hotel, and I kind of added that into the story as well, and made the interior design office just across the street from it. And so yeah,
that's great. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is.
Good research too. We've got a question here from Maureen again. She wants to know, do you have several book ideas currently, and how long does it take for you to write a book?
It does vary. So I do have several book ideas, some in the romance genre. I'm currently writing a paranormal romance, my first adult paranormal romance, and that's under the pen name S. Young, just because there are some contemporary romance readers that don't want to read it. So I thought I'll put S. Young as the pen name for those books, so that they know as soon as they see it that it's maybe not for them. But I've also other genres. I'm interested in other genres going forward as well. So it depends on the genre. So for contemporary romance and adult paranormal, it usually takes me between 2 to 6 months, just depending on circumstances, you know, how much details in the book, how much research, if I have writer's block, what's going on in my personal life. But I'm also interested down the line in writing historical fiction, and I know from being a history student that that's going to take me a lot longer. It'll probably take me a year to 18 months to write a book in that genre, so it does just depend.
So in the case of writing a book in 2 months, which is literally mind-blowing to me, what is your schedule like? Are you writing 24/7? What's a normal day for you look like?
I get up really, really early because that is when I write the most. My brain, as soon as my brain's awake, that is when I could usually get around about 4,000 to 5,000 words done from 6 in the morning till 10, 11 in the morning. And if it's really getting down to the wire, then I will be most of the day writing. I think my record for words in a day is 13,500 words for the day. And I could not feel my butt when I was done. My butt had gone numb, and I am not joking. My fingers were cramped. It was bad.
That's a lot of words in a day.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, can you tell us some plot ideas or plot points for the book that you're currently writing? Give us a little teaser.
The adult paranormal one, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about an ambiguous, mysterious heroine who she herself doesn't know what she is. She knows she's paranormal, but she's incredibly powerful. And she's had quite a dark history. And she's on the run from a human man. And this werewolf who lives in Scotland, he's from the Highlands, he's the chief and alpha of the last werewolf clan in Scotland. His sister is dying from a rare disease that affects lycanthropes, and this human that is after my heroine approaches him and makes a deal that he can get the cure for his sister if he finds the heroine and brings her back. And it's really about their chase and journey across Europe back to Scotland. And it's very much it's another enemies to lovers type story, but it's got a hugely different feel from any of my other books. I am loving writing this book. It's just a pure pleasure to write.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I love the switch. I'm so now, and I think I need to expand out of this genre of yours that I'm familiar with. We've got one more question here from Susan. How many of your ideas or plot outlines actually turn into a published book?
I think probably 50%. I think the other 50% usually kind of either never get off the ground or they start to die from lack of creative feeding halfway through. So yeah, about 50%.
Okay, we want to know what you're reading right now. Do you have any book recommendations for us in our community?
I'm actually going through a historical romance phase right now. So I've just finished Lisa Kleypas, the Ravenel series, because it was the one that I hadn't read. And I'm also rereading Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I don't know if you can see them in the background. And what's the new one I just picked up? I haven't started it yet, but it has Master of Sorrows by Justin, I want to say McCall. It's supposed to be amazing. It's a high fantasy novel.
Amazing. Thank you. Ladies, any other questions? Now's your chance. Send them in. Get typing before we wrap up with Samantha. Samantha, do you have anything you want to share with us? Anything you want us to keep an eye for? Anything you want us to know? Inspiring words?
To keep an eye for, well, let me think. Well, oh yes, I do actually. I have a new book coming out with Berkeley, who published Fight or Flight, and this one again is switching fields. It's more of a women's fiction novel, and it's called Much Ado About You, and it's about a 30-something who is feeling kind of lost in her life. All her friends are getting married or having babies, and she's single and she doesn't like her job, and she decides just to quit life and rent a bookstore in England, and it's all playing on the themes of Shakespeare from Much Ado About Nothing, so those kind of filter into it. So it's really women's fiction driven. It will have a romantic subplot, and just hopefully really feel good and funny and relatable. I'm hoping it to be hugely relatable.
Amazing. It sounds great. I feel like many of our ladies would love that. The plot sounds awesome.
great.
I just want to note that Erin said that we read Daughter of Smoke and Bone years ago in book club, and the ladies loved it.
Yes, it's one of my absolute favorites. It's amazing. I have so many recommendations. It's it's crazy. They're all behind me.
We love it. If you've ever got any more to share, you know where to find us. Our ladies love book recommendations because they're ferocious readers. So
fantastic.
Samantha, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us tonight. We really appreciate you being here virtually. You know, we know that it's, you know, late in the evening where you are. So we appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, no, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much. We can't wait to see those upcoming books from you, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.